Gracie Jiu-Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 134 of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today my guest will be Professor Jim Kelly, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, let's start off with our Jiu-Jitsu quote. And that is, "Don't do a technique 5 times and wait for the instructor to tell you what's next. Do the technique 500 times and wait for the instructor to tell you to stop." And that quote is from Anonymous. What a great quote that is. If we all practiced a little bit more of that, I think it would go a long way in our jiu-jitsu development. All right. Jim Kelly is the owner of Cincinnati Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's had a long and very interesting journey through the martial arts and ultimately in jiu-jitsu. In this interview, we talk about his time in the military and how his jiu-jitsu has evolved over time. The early days with Pedro Sauer and the crew out in Utah, his approach to teaching jiu-jitsu, the biggest influences in his jiu-jitsu journey, self-defense and what's most important about self-defense. And we also learn a little bit about his significant other and how they met. So I know you're going to enjoy this interview. After the interview, make sure you stay tuned for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without further ado, let's talk to Jim. All right, I am speaking with Jim Kelly. So welcome to the show, Jim, and thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today.
Of course, Marty. Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm honored that you're here, and I've been wanting to get you on for a long time. Been an admirer, a fan, if you will, of yours and your work, the stuff you've done in jiu-jitsu. And I've had several people suggest having you on, so I'm glad it's finally happening. So awesome.
Oh, good. I'm glad it worked out too. And it can be hard to get a hold of.
Understandable. So I have a number of things I want to ask you about and cover, but let's just start with where you grew up and what was it like for you in your early life?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, just outside Cincinnati, Milford, and then New Richmond, just two kind of rural towns. I had 2 brothers, and we were really super close, like 10 and 11 months apart between the 3 of us. And I stayed there until I went in the Marine Corps in 1989, winter 89-90s when I enlisted. And then the world changed for me. But it was a good childhood. My parents were awesome. They're great people. Dad's a hard worker. My mom was just a very attentive housewife and mother, and we were her whole world. And me and my brothers, we were just like any other kind of country boys. We got along great when we got along, and we didn't when we didn't. and it was all the typical roughhousing and the craziness and wild sets of friends and stories that I still can't seem to outlive. So
I love it. I can relate to that because I had one brother, but I had 2 cousins that we were 2 months apart, and they lived
that's
out.
Close.
I lived in a small town, but they lived about 10 miles out on 40 acres. It had a creek, it had ponds, bales of hay, cornfields, horses, mini bikes, the whole thing, and just had a blast, the three of us, sometimes the four of us, but always definitely the three of us. And just like you described, kind of loving each other and also tearing each other up at times.
Yeah, speaking to my heart. Yeah, those are good memories. So loved being growing up on the farm. Those were good days.
Well, it sounds like you come from a great family, and I'm sure that helped shape and mold you into the person you at least set the stage for you to evolve into who you have become. Mentioned
absolutely.
You mentioned your military time. Tell us about what led you into going into the military, what you did. I think you were in Special Forces. Tell us about that and just anything that stands out about your military career.
Well, I really was the naive kid when I was in school. I'd read a few books. A good friend of mine had turned me on to a few Navy SEAL books. I thought, well, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And then when we were getting ready to graduate, and I was asked to help clean up some of the recruiting boxes in the stuff that some of the Marines were there. And the guy said, "Son, what are you doing when you graduate?" And I said, "Wow, I'm going to go be a Navy SEAL." He goes, "Oh, no. That's not what you want to be. You want to be a recon Marine." I was like, "Well, what is that?" "No, I'm pretty sure I want to be a Navy SEAL." I said, No. We do everything the Navy SEALs do, plus you're going to be a Marine. I was like, okay, so why is that a big deal? And I was just so naive. I had no idea what I was doing. And the guy just really convinced me that I didn't need to be a Navy SEAL anymore. A recon Marine's really where it was at. And if I wanted the whole chicken dinner, as he put it, then that's where I needed to go. So I said, okay. And that evening, I went in and I signed up to go be a Marine. And boy, they saw me coming. I was so naive. I just didn't understand how the world was. I was this innocent country kid and walked into Parris Island, and boy, I got a rude awakening down there, and that really started the whole path. I was already a hard worker. My father instilled that in me. I knew what it took to get a job done. I wasn't afraid to really kind of get my nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and put in the effort. I was diligent and determined, and I had really an indomitable spirit that my parents had both put inside my heart, and it carried well when I got into the Marine Corps. So boot camp was all boot camp. I can't say that anything was different. I know a lot of guys, when they recount their military career, say, "Oh, well, it all started in boot camp." I don't have any of those stories. I was pretty much the gray guy. I didn't do anything crazy, didn't do anything bad, didn't do anything great. Just I got through training, and then I went to the indoctrination for recon. And at that time, the Gulf War was going. So I passed the first indoc in second force. I wasn't allowed to go. My number was promised to Victor 1-3 out in Hawaii. So I was, whether I liked it or not, was being shipped out there. And on the way, I stopped in Camp Pendleton. I took the first force indoc, passed that, still wasn't allowed to go, and then ended up in Hawaii. And by that time, the whole effort over there in Desert Storm was over with, so I got stuck in Hawaii. I did a deployment to the Philippines. It was the effort to get all the Marine Corps deployments back on schedule, if you will, after the first Gulf War effort. And then I took the third Recon Battalion indoc, passed it, and then they finally let me go. and that's when I got into the reconnaissance community in the Marine Corps. And I did my whole enlistment in the Marine Corps at Reconnaissance Company Hawaii, and I went through some changes. The Marine Corps had a lot of growing pains at that time, and they were trying to figure themselves out whether they wanted to have a special forces kind of capability. So if you say, were you in a special forces unit? Technically at that time, no. The reconnaissance community was not considered special forces. There were some choices that were made in the leadership whenever SOCOM and the true Special Forces community was stood up, and the Marine Corps decided not to play, to the chagrin of a lot of very capable reconnaissance men. So I stayed in the reconnaissance community. I mean, jump and dive and patrol and do CQB and all kinds of
the whole chicken
operations.
Dinner.
You do the whole thing, right? Yeah.
Right.
So it's like when I got my feel in it, and it really set me up. I'd have to say that the Marine Corps, the reconnaissance community, were the formative years that molded the mind and the professional mindset that I had that carried me through the rest of the career. I got out of the Marine Corps. I had some broken time. I was introduced into jiu-jitsu while I was there at Hawaii. There was a student, Rockson Gracie, that was teaching on base. And to be honest, I can't remember the man's name. It wasn't important to me because I was determined to be a Tae Kwon Do practitioner. So when I walked into the gym to go take a class at Tae Kwon Do, there was this group of dudes. They were training on the mats. I didn't know what it was. It just seemed kind of silly to me. And the guy said, "Hey, you want to do jiu-jitsu?" I didn't. I know it was jiu-jitsu now. At the time, I couldn't have repeated that word. I didn't know what it meant. So I walked.
I'm totally smiling when I hear this.
Yeah, I was like, story. No, I'm going to go. I'm taking Tae Kwon Do. I was so arrogant in my naivete. I was just I was just ignorant about the world. So I walked into where the room was going to be, where there was Tae Kwon Do was supposed to happen, and nobody was there. So I had a decision to make. I was either, swallow my pride, go out there and say, hey, my Tae Kwon Do instructor's not here, so what's up with this jiu-jitsu? Or I could just be prideful and just kind of walk out with my nose in the air and not look at the guy. And I didn't. So I swallowed my pride and said, okay, so what's up with this jiu-jitsu stuff? And that was my first introduction into it. I loved it. Shortly thereafter, the UFC came out and we got a bootleg VHS tape. So it was all like, hey, come on over here. Let's go into, Smitty's room and we're going to watch this like Fight Club stuff. Now, we didn't know it was Fight Club. And I doubt that's the term we use, but we knew something was, very kind of out of the ordinary happening. So I watched the UFC video and that just grainy recorded VHS tapes that we all had back then and was blown away. I was like, yeah, all right. So that's the real fight right there. And I was sold. So,
isn't it cool how life works and how that chance encounter, didn't go how you wanted or expected it, but it opened up something even bigger or better potentially?
Oh yeah, it would not. I mean, you look back on how those things happen. If there was one chance meeting or a topic or discussion brought up, that things would have been very differently. And I more or less, and I say this often, I Forrest Gumped it into everything that I did. I was never the best guy at anything. I was never the worst guy. I just kind of was the right guy at the right time with the right opportunity. And I said yes. And that's all I
love that expression. I'm going to have to use that. I Forrest Gumped it. That's awesome.
That's how I did it. I just, lucked out.
So how long were you there training, and then where did you go next?
Well, I was just there, just a few experiences really in Hawaii, and that was towards the end of my enlistment. And I wanted to enlist in Second Force and go to Camp Lejeune, but the Marine Corps was trying to get rid of the reconnaissance community, and I wanted to do the job. I liked being a Marine, but I wasn't in love with the Marine Corps at that time. I really enjoyed the job, and the Marines were trying to get rid of the job. So they were really struggling internally. It was with the drawdown from the administration at that time and a lot of changes internally to the military at large. So I got out and came back to Cincinnati and went to University of Cincinnati for a little bit. And I was a different animal. So I was older than the peer group that I was taking class with. I had already seen the world. I'd been in the Marine Corps, done deployment. I knew what real life was really about. So I just didn't mix well in with college. I did well, but as far as trying to find that peer group. I was used to a different set of rules and a different set of people. So there was this kind of like fun fair that was happening at the university at that time, and I went and visited, and it had all kinds of displays, and one of which was a martial arts display, and it was this local martial art school in town, and they taught JP, and I liked it, and it was kind of real gritty. They were very collie oriented, and which is more focused on the knife and kind of a street fighting real world application, and that really kind of resonated with me. I had already been in a recon Marine, and I'd been around the world, and I'd already seen death and dying and kind of that kind of exposure and the hardcore realities of life. So when I was looking at this martial art, it made sense to me. So I started attending that school and met some good friends whom I'm still good friends with. And they taught me. They were young kids too at that time. The instructor was older. He was just a few years older than me. But his main instructors were young kids, and they were a few years younger than me, maybe about 10 years younger than me. So, but they were very good at what they were doing, and they were good instructors. And I find often that people that are good at what they do may not often be very good at teaching what they do. And these two guys were excellent people. They were excellent character, and they were good teachers. There were three of them actually that really worked with me, and I've maintained those friendships for to this very day, and they have been good friends all along. So I started there, and that was really like the first pursuit that I knew I wanted to do martial arts. So I had been exposed to Edgar Saliti, and he had passed away right after I saw him. He came out there and did a seminar. I loved Kali, and I wanted to do more of it because it had ground fighting, and it had kind of striking and kicking and trapping, and there was weapons involved, and it was just really right up my alley. So I asked the senior instructor, I said, very arrogantly, I want to be where you're at. I want to do what you're doing. How do I do that? Which I don't think goes over well when a man's trying to do is, run a business, and here you are, you're like, I don't want anything to do with you. I want to go where you went. So, right. And he probably laughed at me very much the way you're laughing right now. And I said, well, you got to go out to California. And that was it. I didn't listen to anything else the man had to say. When he said, you got to go to California, I had already formulated a plan. So
you know what, though, I'm laughing, but I think it's awesome that you had that drive and you had that ambition that, hey, I don't want to just do some classes, do some training. I want to go to the top of, the top of the food chain. And I've heard that from a lot of people that ended up going a long way and doing well is when they heard what it takes, whether it's California, whatever, they were willing just to drop whatever and go. So
yes,
big props to you on that.
And I did. Well, I'm young. I got the whole world ahead of me. I want to chart my destiny, and I need to design the life that I want. And all I have to do is make a choice and then make the sacrifice and put the work in. So I did. I found a friend, and he had a friend out in California. And along the way, I went and met with one of my recon teammates, Manuel Zuzumbo. Went out there, and we stayed in St. George, Utah. It was kind of like the last stop before you go to Vegas and then on into LA. So we stayed there for a little bit. We drove into LA after hanging out in St. George for just a few days, and then started training with Paul Vunak.
Oh yeah.
And because his then girlfriend, who used to be Coyote Kim from the Cincinnati radio station, she would do like morning updates. She was a friend, and she did martial arts, and she trained at the school that we trained at. And those two started dating. She met Paul when he came into a local area with Jack McVicker back in the day. Out in Terre Haute, Indiana, I think is where we all met, and those two started dating. They started up a romance. We went out there and hung out with Paul. The friend that I traveled out there was Shawn Owens, and he was a fellow student of mine in the Cincinnati school. And we just continued to train, and really it was the martial art bum community. So you were doing whatever odd jobs you could do to pay the rent. We slept on many matted floors. And most of the time back then, most martial arts studios did not have matted floors. They had maybe a indoor-outdoor carpet or something like that, or they had some of the mats that we were plagiarizing from the gymnastics community and laying out. So it wasn't all nice like everyone has today. Like it was a little tough back then. So if you were going to train grappling, chances are you weren't training on a properly padded floor. So it was, and oftentimes it might have just been concrete. So we just trained everywhere we could. I met Mark Denny at the Inisano Academy, and he said, hey, we're going to have a gathering at Hermosa Beach. You're welcome to go. So we're like, yeah, sure. What is it? He said, well, it's a no rules stick fighting, and you can fight. All you need is like a fencer's mask and probably batting gloves or something, and you're going to be good. There's no other protection. We fight with real sticks. So I was like, yes.
You're like, that's for me, man.
You are speaking my language. I'm going to go. So Shawn and I did, and Shawn he was more talented than I was. He was a very good practitioner of Kali, and he was like the guy that could just remember the patterns and had a finesse about it. And he was also a very talented musician. So it kind of makes sense. I started kind of seeing how different people whose talent-based you normally see kind of exposed in certain performances, like guys who are very good at skateboarding or snowboarding or surfing tend to be very good at jiu-jitsu. Guys that are very good at musician instruments tend to be very good at like boxing and Kali and knife work. Just some weird, just some of my observations. And Shawn was one of those guys, and he said, hey, let's go do this. So for me, I was kind of like the gorilla. I was the knuckle dragger. So I could do it, but because I loved to do it and I had a passion for it. But as far as being the finesse, the martial arts perfectionist that Shawn was, I was not that guy. But I hit hard. So we went into the first gathering, and I had a blast. And the gathering was for the Dog Brothers. And right after that, Shawn and I were both inducted into the pack. And I fought in the gathering at the Dog Brothers right up until the last time that they stayed at Hermosa Beach. I never fought at the Raw Gym. So when they moved on from the park where we fought, then I continued on with jiu-jitsu. It was just kind of the way my life was. But my first love of martial arts will always be Kali. Wow. And very proud of the time and that I spent fighting at the gathering and value those friendships. Eric Naus was an exceptional person, and Mark Denny, very formative of my idea of what real martial art practicing should be. So I came away from that experience knowing that you can do patterns and you can do kind of choreography, but that was only in the effort to make your fighting better. So it was never the pursuit in of itself. So, and I carried that through jiu-jitsu. And then a friend of mine said, hey, man, you really should get into jiu-jitsu again. Thought that I had a knack for it. And I said, well, I don't know that I really want to stay in California. It was very expensive, and I was having a hard time bouncing from place to place to figure out where to live. He said, no, there's this guy named Pedro Sauer in Salt Lake City, and you should probably go check it out. So, he knew I had a friend in St. George, which is just 4 hours south. I thought, well, yeah, maybe that would work out. So I didn't really know. So it was kind of one of those things where I like, well, this isn't really going to work out just because of logistics. I got to regroup, figure out what I want to do, and then come back at it again. So I went back to St. George, and I met a guy who was wearing a Navy SEAL T-shirt, and it was at a restaurant. His name was Jake Johnston, and I thought I was so arrogant. It's embarrassing now to kind of tell some of the stories of how I was back then, but. I walked up to him and said, "Yeah, what BUD/S class were you in?" I mean, I'm not a Navy SEAL, but I had enough friends that I kind of knew how to vet somebody. And this guy did not look like a Navy SEAL to me. He was just too pretty. Well, which is, most Navy SEALs are definitely good-looking guys, but this guy was like, "Yeah, I just didn't get the feel for it." And he was like, and I kind of said it in a way that I was punking him out. Now, this guy was having lunch with his architecture firm. Well, he was sitting there at this Mexican restaurant in St. George, Utah, with a bunch of other professional people, and I was just basically throwing down the gauntlet right there at lunch in the restaurant. I was ready just to get after it.
Wow, challenge match.
Basically, it was. How embarrassing. And Jake was very accommodating, and he was just polite and kind. He said, "No. I went to BUD/S, but I was dropped because I hurt my knee, and I'm out of the Navy now, and now I just do jiu-jitsu." And the whole world stopped.
Wow.
I was like, "What? You do jiu-jitsu?" He was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, so let's meet out at the park." And he was like, "All right." So I told him a time and said, "Hey, I'm going to be at the park. Meet me out there." So I left him alone and went about my day. Later on that afternoon, he shows up, and we were out at the park, and I was like, "All right, so let's go." So we wrestle, and he handed my butt to me. It's like when you don't know jiu-jitsu, and I thought I knew. I kind of had an idea, but Jake was a blue belt, a very seasoned blue belt at that time, and he was so graceful and so gentle that it was really upsetting to me. I thought, how is this guy just throwing me around and not even breathing hard? I was very offended. So, but I had it. It was another decision point, and I had to sit there and think, all right, I could be all prideful and tear this guy down and say he's not as good. It's just whatever. He got lucky. Or I could say, all right, what are you doing to me, and would you teach me? And I chose the latter. I said, what are you doing?
Good for you, man.
And would you teach me? And Jake was like, yeah, dude, let's share jiu-jitsu. Let's reason some philosophy of leverage. I'm like, all right, man. And that's it. So Jake and I became best friends, and we're still best friends. And he is my all-time favorite training partner that I've ever had. It's just the way I just liked his style. I liked his body length was very comparable to mine. He's slightly taller, but we're very, very similar. And he was a purist, so he loved jiu-jitsu the way that he had learned it from Pedro Sauer and from Grandmaster Elio. He had taken classes, and from Rickson, and that was my exposure that changed everything. And it was with Jake Johnston down there in St. George. We opened up our own little school with me, Shawn Owens, and Jake, and we had a martial arts for a couple years until a very unfortunate incident happened where we decided to move on and part ways. And then we went up to Salt Lake, and I joined Pedro's school and was Pedro's student for a number of years, right up until 9/11. I was pursuing jiu-jitsu, and I met Jeff Curran at that time. I met Matt Strack out at Kissimmee when the Pan Ams were there. That was, I think, the last year that Rockson Gracie was competing. So I was friends with Rockson and videotaped all of his fights. I think I'm probably one of the only guys who has all the last fights that Rockson Gracie fought at the Pan Ams.
Wow.
On video. I still have all those, and met some just legends in the community. Flavio Bhering, Silva Bhering, Met at Kissimmee there at the 1999, I think, Pan Ams, and convinced Matt Strack to come out to Salt Lake. So he and I moved in together. I was living with Jorge Jiminez at the time, as another black belt from Pedro Sauer. I was living in his basement. Jorge's a brother to me. He's an excellent jiu-jitsu guy, just a very salt of the earth kind of person. Love the man.
He's been on the show. He's an incredible guy for sure.
Right. So it's kind of like very small world. There's a kind of a who's who at that time of what was going on. Like my peer group at that time was super small, all of which are now famous jiu-jitsu practitioners and do very well for themselves. Like Ricky Lindell was like just a kid.
Wow.
Maybe 6, 7 years old. He was in the kids class, and so that time was really magical because you either knew jiu-jitsu or you didn't. And if you didn't, you like Pedro would say in the land of blind people, the man with one eye is king. And that's the way it was. It was a magical time. And Rickson would come through and stay at Pedro's place, and we get to see him. And Hoyler would do that. And there was just a lot of good jiu-jitsu kind of moving around. And at that time, those guys were really kind of figuring out what they were doing. They had the internal family politics going on with the Torrance Academy. The UFC was kind of figuring out whether they were going to, stay with the Gracie family or they were going to sell that thing or move on. There was, the Machado brothers were splitting. Renzo went to New York. All that stuff was all happening at that time that I was walking into jiu-jitsu, and I lived through it all and I watched it all, and I remember the stories because I was there when these things happened. And I now, for my students, all that stuff is just stories now. Like I remember what Grandmaster Elio looked like and sounded like and felt like and how he spoke, even though I didn't speak Portuguese. I remember the man in real life. I remember
that's so cool.
The few times that I had exposure to him and his teaching. I remember what that was like. So trying to teach someone like, hey, this is the way you would want to do jiu-jitsu, on a question invariably from a student say, well, how would you know? Well, I do know, because not only did I learn it from the source, I did learn it from the source's sons and their best friends and the people that were there when it was being made up. I remember those things, but now it's all passed into history. They're all stories now. The brothers are getting older, and now it's being carried on by their sons and their students. But we lived through it.
What an incredible time to be there and involved in all that, and all the people that you cross paths with at that time, man. That's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy. I remember just lots of things were happening. Like Todd Hollywood Hayes came in one time in the 92 or the 2002 Olympics, and he wanted to train jiu-jitsu. And where did he go? He went to Pedro's place, and he was training there in the school. Or Tito Ortiz came in when he was a UFC champion, and a good friend of ours, Pittsburgh, we called him Pittsburgh, wrestled with that and made Tito Ortiz walk out of the gym and puke, not once but twice. I mean, things like that was happening. And Pittsburgh was probably a 175-pound kid, just lanky and an animal. And those things were happening all the time. There was all kinds of people that were coming through seeking jiu-jitsu education from Pedro, because Pedro was so accessible. And there's a unique thing about Pedro Sauer, which is, I think it's important to mention, is that Pedro, he wasn't a Gracie, but he grew up with the guys, and he was best friends with Rickson and Helson, and he grew up with those guys, and he was in their peer group. But since he wasn't a Gracie, he had to learn it from them, and he had to figure out how to learn it the way he saw it, and he learned it from all kinds of the brothers. So Helson liked to do it one way, and Rickson liked to do it another way, but Hoyler liked to do it a different way, and Horian wanted to do it a different way. He could tell you that and say, well, Rickson likes to do it like this, and Helson will say to do it like this. but I like to do it this way. And that's the way he taught. So right off the bat, there wasn't this rigid, hard line, you do Gracie Jiu-Jitsu this way and no other way. Wow. He was always very broad-minded, and he was very much engaged in the whys of what Jiu-Jitsu, why it made it work, why you were doing what you were doing. And I think without him, there was a little bit of a language barrier because English is not Pedro's first language. He's so much better than it is now. But we used to make fun of him so much for his accent and just, the loss in translation of humor and certain words and innuendo. Those things were always fun between his students and himself. And he would give you the why of what you were doing, and then he would encourage you to break the rules and figure out your own way. And that, I think, is what made Pedro Sauer very unique. So he could tell you a variety of ways to do something and give credit where credit was due. Mm-hmm. And he would do what he would do, but he never came down on you for not doing it the way that he did it. As long as you understood the why, you were allowed to explore jiu-jitsu on your own. I think that made some of Pedro's students very good and very talented.
I love hearing that because there's certainly a place for, honor and respect of tradition, passed down for sure. But there's also, things have to evolve, and you have to have that freedom to evolve. And for him to be able to be like that and not only accept, but encourage people to individualize it and find what works for them within the technique. That's wonderful. And it's funny, you mentioned the language and making jokes and stuff. Ricky Lindell was on, and he was talking about, he started when he was just a little kid, and Pedro's daughter was in there in the class with him. But he mentioned that same thing. It seems like it was such a good time around that.
It was just a really, really wonderful time. That was the golden years of jiu-jitsu here in America. Was when you could still get to see a Gracie if you wanted. You could see a brother, family member, or a cousin and learn it from the source. Still available, and it was affordable. Pedro would teach half-hour privates, or maybe it was 1 hour for $15.
Wow!
Imagine that now. There's no way that would happen.
That's amazing.
And, yeah, it was a great time, and it had a lot of really good influences on it. And everyone came from someone. What made it special at that time was that, like Alan Hopkins, incredible martial artist. He has black belts in multiple disciplines. He is a disciplined practitioner of jiu-jitsu. He came from Kansas, and he ended up there. There was other everyone that was there was a black belt in something from somewhere else, that we all came to Pedro Sauer school and we were learning jiu-jitsu. So we had this understanding of the formalities of traditional martial arts because we had come from those backgrounds. However, it was a collegiate level or doctorate level experience and environment where we're like, we're going to dispense with all the pleasantries and the formalities, and we're really just going to focus on what's important here. But no one neglected it. It wasn't like it was very undisciplined. It wasn't, because we all had a background in it, and we knew. We just didn't bring it into jiu-jitsu. We just practiced jiu-jitsu for its own sake, not bringing any kind of Western or a Western idea of what an Eastern mind would be for martial arts experiences. You line up and you bow and you say os and all kind of rigid martial art mentalities. That didn't exist then, because everyone came from those experiences and chose not to stay in those disciplines because it was a dead end. People saw that jiu-jitsu was something that was true, and there was truth in its practicing, and we practiced it and explored it because we believed that it was reality, and we cut away from all the other kind of club cultures at that time, and that made it. And it was very family oriented, very kind of unique. You felt like you were part of this elite thing that was happening, that you were either in the club or you weren't. Anybody could be in the club. And the only price for admittance was that You didn't quit. Like you had to actually practice it. You couldn't sit on the sidelines. You couldn't practice a kata somewhere. You couldn't just punch a bag.
You couldn't just buy the T-shirt. You had to get in there and earn it.
You had to wrestle.
Yeah.
And no one cared whether you win or lost. They were just glad you were there.
That's
and that
great,
was it,
man.
You were part of the club. And it was an amazing time. And it was very strong personalities that I have valued over the years that helped me out through life.
It sounds like just an amazing time, and you're fortunate to be part of that, and what a great history. And you've had some amazing people that you were influenced by, like Master Pedro and others that you mentioned. Let's talk about Master Rickson a little bit. I know you've sought him out and spent time with him, and he also had an impact on your jiu-jitsu, right?
Yes, I think I learned jiu-jitsu from Pedro Sauer and from Pedro Sauer's instructor, Alan Hopkins. So Alan taught a lot of the classes, and then when Pedro wasn't there. So it was Pedro and Alan, I learned jiu-jitsu. So like, how do you do what do you do? Well, we do this technique when this guy does this thing. And then Rickson would always talk, or Pedro would always talk about Rickson, and he came in, I'd seen him before, and but by the time that I was about a purple belt, I wanted to start competing, and I looked at competitions as a way for me to gauge my progress against my peers outside of my jiu-jitsu school. And the only criteria for winning was submission. So I didn't care if I won by points. I was disappointed, and I didn't care if I lost by points. I felt that was good defense. But I wanted to submit you. And if I couldn't, then I knew I had work to do. I had to continue training until my technique was superior against my opponents, and then I knew that I was progressing. And in that effort, I went to go see a seminar that Rickson was putting on. It was after the death of Rockson, and he decided that he was going to start teaching people the how of what he was doing, how he does what he does. And that, I should probably back that up. Just prior to that, I went to the World Championships, the Mundial in Tijuca tennis course. It was last year that they held the championships at the Tijuca tennis course in Rio. And I went down there. I was training for maybe 3-4 months. I lived with Marcio Coletta, now very big UFC champion, Marcio Coletta and Fabricio Verdum and Mario Hayes. Those are the kind of three big guys that were all at the school, all world champions, and Fabricio's the UFC champion. And we were at Porto Alegre, and then I competed and qualified just like any other Brazilian. So went to the regional competitions and made my way and earned my spot into the Mundials, just like any Brazilian would have. And I got injured and competed well, didn't win, I didn't place, but I had an excellent experience. However, I thought I knew a little bit of jiu-jitsu. So when I came back, I was like, okay, I need to take this serious, and Rickson's going to have this seminar, so I want to go, and I want to, pursue better training. So when I went to the seminar at Rickson's school, he did a warm-up, and I'll never forget this. This was the moment where I knew that this was where I wanted to be. So we were doing the shrimp movement across the mat, and Rickson, I said, all right, guys, stand up against the wall. Jim, do that again. So I'm just trying to fake his accent, but, we all do.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
And so I started shrimping across the wall, across the floor, and he goes, okay, stop. And he looks at everyone and he goes, this is exactly how not to do this. I was like, dang,
just what you want to happen to you, right?
So you got that moment again, back in Hawaii on that Marine Corps base, was like, I got a decision to make. I could tuck my tail between my legs and say, what a jerk. And walk out of there and say, all right, okay, I'll play your game. I'll be a Huckleberry. How do I do this right? And that's whenever he started teaching us. He started coming off what it was that he was doing and why he was doing it. It wasn't like the technique. It was the technique. Everyone knew the technique. But without him explaining to you why he was doing what he was doing and how he was doing it, and that was the invisible part, you had no clue. It looked like the same upa or the same bridge or the same posture that everyone else was doing, but it wasn't. And he kept that to himself, and I understand why now. I mean, he at one time he said, why do I want to teach anyone else to beat my children? Of course you wouldn't want to do that at a certain point. You're going to give your kids that special love so that they have a good fighting chance. You're just not going to give the pearls to the swine, so to speak, everywhere else. And then, where does your legacy go? And he was finally telling and sharing with people how he was doing what he was doing and the why. And that changed everything. So I already knew jiu-jitsu, so I knew what it was for good technique. I understood the leverage. I understood efficiency. I understood how to be smooth and thoughtful in your placements of leverage and weight distribution. But the way Rickson was talking about it, and then he would show you in a demonstrating in a very specific position that illustrated his point, it created a deeper understanding of what it was that we were doing. And that changed my jiu-jitsu entirely. Everything that I had known up until that point was just one technique after another. It was never connected with a relationship or connection or structure or weight distribution. None of that was in play in my mind. And I would go back and I'd say, Pedro, hey, why didn't you show me this stuff? And he'd say, well, what did Rickson show you? And I would show it to him. And he goes, oh, yeah, we've been doing that. And I'm like, okay, why didn't you say anything? And the thing that I come to learn from the guys that learned jiu-jitsu in the time of Rickson and Pedro and Halls was that they were just doing it and didn't know any other way. And the way that they were doing it was just the way you did it.
Wow.
It's just the way that you did it. And when people, it was so innate in the way that they moved their bodies and the way that they expressed the technique that Grandmaster Elio was teaching them. When they came through the language barrier here to America and they were teaching technique, they were teaching what they thought people wanted to know. The technique. Yeah, put your arm here, put your hand there, and do this, and then you'll have this kind of result. The how was kind of a no-brainer. Well, when I would show him, this is what Rickson's really saying to do, he would say, well, yeah, of course, that's the way you're always supposed to do that. I'm like, well,
hilarious.
Why didn't you tell me? And then I had another paradigm shift was that the ability to deliver that kind of information is really unique. It's a practiced thing. And Rickson was finally starting to share that he always could. He just didn't because he was a competing person at the time, and he wasn't going to show any. Jiu-jitsu was out there. Everyone could see it. You knew how to do the technique, whether it was coming from Sambo or pancration or catch-as-catch-can. The techniques were there. But how Rickson was doing it, he wasn't sharing until that year. And then once he started sharing it, that changed everything. And I never stopped pursuing whatever Rickson was trying to share. If he had something to say, I was paying attention to it, and I was revisiting all the jiu-jitsu that I knew from Pedro, and I was trying to incorporate the why and the how of what it was that I was actually doing.
You know, the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu, one of the beautiful things is that you as a practitioner are ever evolving. There's always so much more to learn, and that doesn't just mean more techniques or anything like that, submission chains or whatever, but there's always different aspects and different depths to get to in your understanding, right? And that's a beautiful thing. Scott Smith of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Kentucky, said he was really impacted by you his time with you and how you taught. And he came to realize that because of what you just mentioned, you're learning from Rickson and all the depth and the why that really brought yours to life in a different way. And that had a big impact on him and eventually led him to seek out Henry Akins, who of course is very similar to Rickson in many ways. But yeah, he talks about how much he got out of that impact you had on him, just like Rickson has on you.
Yeah, Scott is a great guy. I remember when he would come in, Curran would say something. It was like, it's just like learning to speak a language all over again. And if you just don't understand the language, well, you just don't understand, and you got a choice to make. You can go back and relearn it the right way, the way he would say it, or you can just suffer and kind of just do what you want. But as soon as you start grabbing a hold of a guy, if they're speaking the right language, if they even understand what it is that they're doing. So this is a point beyond jiu-jitsu that I was trying to seek and grasp a hold of, the way Rickson was trying to give it to you, was if you didn't know what it was that he was doing, not the technique, but if you didn't know how he was doing what he was doing, you weren't even on the same playing field. Not alone that, Rickson's great and he beat everybody up and, won all these things. Okay, aside from that, just on the base level, you would struggle to understand what Rickson was trying to tell you if you didn't grasp the deeper definitions of what it was that he was trying to convey, the ideas. And Curran would often say that. I was like, it's just learning a different language. And if you don't know, we're not even speaking the different language. You don't know what you're doing. Even though you think you know jiu-jitsu, you don't know what you're doing. So when I remember Curran saying that, so when I was training with Scott Smith, he was a good black belt. It wasn't a joke. And he was a bigger guy than me, and he was stronger, and he weighed heavier. So all the good factors, aside from technique, were in his favor. But I could tell that he didn't understand the language I was speaking. I had been changed by the way Rickson had opened my eyes to jiu-jitsu. And at a very simple level, I could stop the techniques that were being applied to me because I had a deeper understanding of what made them work, what posture actually means, and the interaction in relationship between someone mounting you and you mounting them, and someone having a proper application of pressure and weight distribution on the cross side. At a very fundamental level, I was speaking a different language. And I remember him struggling and trying to make the technique work. He just didn't know how to do it. He knew what to do. He just didn't know how to do it. And after the end of the training, he said, why? What is it that you're doing? And I went back to the basics. Here's posture. Here's how you correctly bridge. Here's how you make connection. And it was all the things. And when I teach, I try to, if it's something that Rickson taught me, I try to teach verbatim the way that I learned it, because I want to have a faithful reflection of what it was that he taught me. I don't want to kind of interpret it unless it's something, well, this is my opinion and this is the way I like to do it. But if I try to teach it the way that I learned it from Rickson, I try to say exactly what it is that he said in exactly the way that he said it in the exact technique that he used to illustrate that. And when I showed that to Scott, I could see the light bulb turn on, and he recognized the value in it. It's like, where do I get this? I said, well, you got to know how to ask the question when you train with Pedro, because Pedro knows it. You just got to know how to ask him the question. Otherwise, he's not going to think that you don't understand it. He's just going to assume that you know it. So you got to know how to ask the question to Pedro, which is a huge thing when you have access to these guys. When you're training, if you ever get the chance to train with Helson or Rickson or the older guys now, the big question is knowing how to ask what you want to know. The knowledge is there, obviously, but if you don't know how to ask it, you can't get the information out of them because they simply don't know what you don't know.
Wow.
And that was a big thing that I started to realize, because I would come back and say, this is what Rickson's doing. And Pedro would say, yeah, of course. So like, why didn't you tell me that? And I realized, well, I didn't know how to ask the question. So he started asking questions differently to Pedro when he was training with Pedro. And then I said, the only other guy that I know is Henry. So if you want to get this, Henry hasn't learned anywhere else. So everything that's in Henry's mind was formulated in the time that he spent learning jiu-jitsu out there under Rickson. So those are good sources, or Chris Saunders, or Pedro Sauer. Like, those are the places that you want to go if you want to learn good jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
I think Chris Rice in Canada as well. But so that started his pursuit of jiu-jitsu in a different way, in the way that Rickson was starting to share his invisible jiu-jitsu. And that was a fun time. And Scott Smith and I have been friends, very good friends ever since. I admire the man. He's a great person.
He is a great person. He was talking about your approach to teaching and how that, resonated so well with him. And he liked how you used the term "let's learn." He said he wasn't even. He said he wasn't even sure that you were aware of using it, but he thought it was pretty cool. So
let's learn.
So you also taught last year at the fall camp, Pedro Sauer fall camp, and I didn't get to attend, but I have seen some videos from that and really enjoyed that, especially your stuff related to self-defense. So let's talk a little bit about self-defense. What's most important in your mind about self-defense or teaching self-defense, and what do people often miss when it comes to that?
Well, I think what a lot of people miss when it comes to self-defense is its application in the whole. So we often teach very linear. This man does this to us, and then we're going to have this response. And that's okay. As instructors, we have to have a method of delivering the information. There has to be a way in which we illustrate the indicator of the opponent, and then we're going to demonstrate the response that we're going to perform. And then you have to do it in a way that's easily repeatable so that the student base can practice and get meaningful repetitions in order to obtain the skill and retain that. Outside of that, in the way like Bruce Lee used to say, it's entertainment. The technique's mine. We've just entertained each other, and it's not yours until you do the work. So there's that aspect of it. And I think that's where most people stop. They'll do technique and they'll be very exquisite in the execution of a self-defense technique, but rarely do they move beyond that strict application in its practicing. And I think that as martial artists, especially as self-defense practitioners, that you have to start to change the training methodology, not really what it is that you're training, but how you're going to train that. So if we're going to train, for example, you're going to learn the technique, then you're going to start introducing a little bit of randomized feeds for the opponent so that you respond appropriately to the technique you're training. And then we're going to increase one more level of complexity to training apparatuses, say like gloves or face masks or some sort of protective equipment, so that you can increase the more natural expression of the technique's force. And then you're going to go into sparring so that you can practice at a truly random feed from your opponent. Those things we rarely do in self-defense as far as jiu-jitsu is practicing. Now, Kali and Jung Fun Kung Fu and Western boxing and kickboxing and those kinds of martial arts do it all the time. They do it all the time. And it was a philosophy of what made Bruce Lee so unique, was his methodology of training. I like to do that in jiu-jitsu. I like to bring those training methodologies into the self-defense aspect of jiu-jitsu. Once you know the technique, great. Time to move on. So that's the beginning aspect of it. Now you need to start sparring with it. And that's where I think a lot of people kind of lose their faith in self-defense the way that jiu-jitsu puts it forth, because it isn't practiced. So there isn't this sense of reality to it. There isn't a confidence that it does do as advertised. Now, the ground techniques, everyone does that, and everyone believes in it because you get down there and you actually practice that. But that doesn't happen often in stand-up techniques for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And I practiced that way. It was one of the things that I learned from Pedro Valente. He seriously impressed me because that's the way he demonstrated a few techniques that I had less than stellar success in real life. When I was deployed overseas, there were 2 times that a jiu-jitsu technique did not work for me, and it ended up in a very bad situation. I survived it, and then I went and asked Curran, I asked Henner, I asked Helson, I asked Rickson how you do these techniques, and they all said the same technique. The jiu-jitsu is what it is. Here's how you do it. But it didn't work for me in that very instance. And I remember Rickson saying to me, he said, well, no one's ever tried to kill me. I would ask you, how would you do that? Mm. And it really kind of changed my mind was, all right, there is a difference for those that have experienced real life experiences and can tell you what that's like. It influences their teaching because the passion behind it comes from a place of reality. It's right. Not academic. It's not abstract. It isn't theory. It's a reality of this is what I did in this situation and this is what worked. And that gives you a certain authority to do that. And I think that as far as self-defense, I practice self-defense. I love self-defense because it works for me. It has worked for me. I use it whenever I was during my deployment years. It's something that I believe in. However, the way that you practice it has got to be different than just the traditional, very linear expression of the opponent throws the stick in this fashion, and then you're going to defend it in the prescribed defensive technique. Like, that's great to learn it, but that isn't reality, and it's not the best way to actually practice it. Once you know it, you need to broaden your horizons to start practicing in the way that other martial arts practice their craft to develop a reality to what it is that you're doing.
I agree. I agree that when you've been in a life or death situation and used your stuff, it gives you, of course, a whole different perspective than if you've never been in that situation like that. But even aside from technique, when we're talking about training self-defense, changing the variables to create intensity once you have techniques down, doing it low lighting or no lighting, doing it on uneven ground where it's going to change your body and its relation and gravity and different things. Or one thing that I did that I think it really added a lot to mine, I'd like to see this incorporated, into jiu-jitsu is the, I went through something called fear adrenal stress.
Okay.
Bill Kipp and all that reality stuff way back when they had the big bullet man and that kind of thing, the big armor and yeah. I did that. And if you never let yourself get adrenalized, now you get adrenalized when you're like competing and things like that. It's one of the benefits of that. But doing it in self-defense situations, and even starting with what he called wolfing, meaning someone gets in your face and starts yelling at you or cussing at you, and you immediately get kind of triggered and adrenalized. And that very much affects, because you go into that reptilian brain part, and you need to be able to do it under that kind of pressure, right? So I think that changes everything. I'd like to see some of that incorporated into a lot of the curriculums.
Yeah, those things are very difficult. I think the military has tried to do that, especially when I went into the Army. I found my way in a special place, and I spent my career there. And every day was a sense of reality. So we were doing the job, pursuing the enemy, and it was there was always the option of a fatal finish. So those things, that was the endeavor, was to eliminate the enemy from the battlefield. So real quick, I was faced with the realities of what warfare actually is. So I never saw actual combat in the first Gulf War. So most of my military career was peaceful until 9/11 happened, and I went into the Army, and then they went to where I was recruited to, and that experience changed my jiu-jitsu. And it was kind of both back and forth. So I knew what aggressive behavior looked like. I knew what a man could do to you and what a man could not do to you. And those things really gave me a sense of what authentic danger actually is. The weapons of war are one thing, but you also understand what the max effective range of any weapon system is, and in the lethalities and the components that make that dangerous. Those are all very known quantities. But as far as the emotional aspect, I came very quickly to understand that fighting in any kind of emotion was the quickest way of losing that fight. Now, you're playing for keeps, and we're shooting at each other, and the enemy's trying to shoot you, and you're doing your best to stay alive and shoot them. That emotional component has to remain in check. You cannot lose focus of that. You will find yourself in the losing end of that argument. So whenever I would train jiu-jitsu, I would really focus on being very unemotional, very focused in just what the reality and what the moment was. Just do what I need to do the best that I can. If I know that I need to fight right now for this technique, I fight for it right now. I don't allow myself to just acquiesce to whatever my opponent does. Well, I'll just rest right here for a little bit. Okay, maybe he'll tire out too. No, I stay in the moment. It's a practice thing. I stay very focused, and I stay very unemotionally involved. There's a time for emotion afterwards, and it's certainly as human beings, those emotions will come. There's no way of not experiencing that.
Sure.
But there is a way, and it's a practice thing, to not be emotional in the moment. And I always hear, and that was something that I learned from Rickson. He was never emotional in his fight. You watch the Coliseum or Pride, the fights that they had, he's very stoic, very unemotional. He was very in the moment. And that is the truth of the way war fighting is practiced at the highest level. It's very sterile. You do what you need to do as efficiently as you can in the moment that you need to do it, nothing more, nothing less.
Yep.
And then that allows you to free up the mind so that you can solve the puzzle. And there's a whole bunch of factors that are in that statement. So training and natural responses and reactions and standard operating procedures and that sort of thing. Much of it is very similar to the practicing of jiu-jitsu. You understand when you pass the guard, a well-practiced jiu-jitsu guy will start the technique, but he's not doing it step by step by step the way you do it when you're just beginning your journey in jiu-jitsu. At 7-10 years, most of that movement that you're going to do is just automated, and you're just trying to accomplish the technique, and you just move through the movements without actually being very linear. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You just go 1 to 5 and you make the technique work. If there was a gap in there, you just either passed it up or you ignored it because you knew where the objective was and you just got yourself there. And I think that those things really went back and forth on the emotions for my actual experience in combat and how I viewed the practicing of jiu-jitsu. Which is very different than watching your daughter play volleyball. I would get so nervous I'd get sick. I couldn't stand it. But when it came to fighting and jiu-jitsu, even to the point of being faced with my own mortality, standing toe to toe with someone when one of you is going to die, you're really hoping it's going to be the other guy, and never got emotional in the moment.
It's amazing, and thank God you survived it all, and thank you for serving.
No, thank you.
Yeah, man. And let me back up just for a second. When I was talking about the fear adrenal, I'm not suggesting that every school, had to take beginners and start stressing them out.
Yeah.
So this is, of course, well advanced into someone's journey. But again, thank you for that and that insight and being willing to share. Let's transition, Jim, to something. When you talked about emotions, let's talk about a time when it's good to have emotions. And tell us about your significant other. I know you have a girlfriend. It's a very big part of your life. Tell us about her and how you guys met.
Well, I met her in Australia, and it was in between the first effort into Afghanistan, and then right when we were switching over to the invasion of Iraq. So it was about the time frames, a number of years ago. And I walked into this bar with a friend of mine who was living down there, and my best friend who I was training, deployed with. He was in the unit with me. So he and I went to Australia with a mutual friend. Three of us walk into this bar. Then I see this beautiful woman, and I was taken at the time, and I was in a relationship, and I had a daughter, and whom I love. But of course, when you see a beautiful woman, you can't help but see a beautiful woman and recognize that. And I did that. And I started teasing my friend Shawn. I'm like, hey, dude, you gotta ask this girl out. You gotta ask this girl out. And he was like, no, man, I don't think so. And then she walked up and she took her order. And we're like, yeah, we'll take Killian's. And she said, you guys must be Americans, which clearly told me she wasn't. So she wasn't. And it started from there. She and Shawn's passed away a few years ago, and they dated for a while, and I forgot all about her. And life happened, and she ended up getting married to another close friend of mine, and I got married. And our lives went our separate ways, and we did our thing, and then she came to a divorce. I had a divorce, and years after that, I was sitting in my jiu-jitsu school, and I had seen that she opened up a bar. It's called the Bell and the Bear. It's in Blue Ash, Ohio. And I remember that was a dream of hers. I remember that was something that she and her husband always talked about. I was like, yeah, they're going to go to Toronto, and we're going to start a bar. And, this was, kind of the Tom Cruise cocktail story that I envisioned. Now, she would probably have a very different take on that, but that's how I see it. And it's my story, so I'm going to tell it the way I want to tell it.
Absolutely.
So, and I remember sitting in the jiu-jitsu place, and I remember thinking, our former lives are all to the winds now, and it's just she and I left here in Cincinnati, and I thought, it was a big deal. I own a business. She now owns a business. I'm going to go see how she's doing. And I had nothing in my mind whatsoever that this was going to be a romantic thing. I've met her one time, but I would say that I really wasn't fond of her. Once I got to know her, I was really like, yeah, I'm glad that you dated my friends and not me, because I don't think I like you too much. So whenever she said, yeah, hey, I'm at the bar right now. You can come over anytime. And the jiu-jitsu school is really 5 minutes away from where her bar is. So I texted back. I was surprised that it was all on Facebook, because I didn't have her number. It was all on this messaging app for Facebook. So I said, well, yeah, man, I got nothing to do. I'll be right on over. So I drove over, and it was like I was meeting a person that I've known for 16 years for the very first time. She was a very different person, and I could tell that life had matured her and produced a depth in her that was very obvious. And the bar was amazing, and she's a very successful, competent businesswoman in a tough area of business. Being a female bar owner in Cincinnati, when I'd say 99% of the bar owners are definitely not female, she does very well, and it's apparent. So we just sat and talked, and I think life had changed me. Of course, I'd been through combat for a long time and a divorce, and lost friends, and all those life experiences produces a depth in your character. And I think that she saw that, and I still wasn't thinking anything. We were just kind of just sharing each other's life, kind of catching up. And she said, well, I do have to work. It was really great seeing you, but if you'd like to go get dinner and we could just visit, that would be cool. I was like, yeah, okay. So the next day, we tentatively made a plan to have dinner, and she texted me, said, hey, you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, I almost didn't do it. I was like, I don't know. And I thought, yeah, I'll do it. So I drove out to the restaurant, and when I got out of the car, she was standing there. Now, I don't know that she planned it, but she looked extra beautiful then. So when I got out of the car and walked out, I was like, oh, okay. So, wow, you changed. So
she planned it, man. She planned it.
Right? You know she did. So we walked in and very, very innocently, I just, wow, you look beautiful. And it was a genuine compliment. And the way that she's told it was like, oh, she got butterflies at that moment. And me, I was just already smitten. I thought, wow. I'd known this woman for, I think, 16 years at that time. She knew my daughter and my ex-wife, and we were all friends. And as a matter of fact, was a part of the jiu-jitsu school when we first started a number of years ago. So I'd known her for a long time. We just kind of walked away out of each other's lives because that's what happens in life. And then that dinner, we went afterwards. I said, hey, would you like to see jiu-jitsu school? And she said, sure. So we continued talking, went to the jiu-jitsu school and showed her all that had happened and how far I had come. We'd changed locations. It was a bigger, nicer place. And then after that, I said, I'm really enjoying myself. I mean, I would just take you home if you want to, but if not, we can continue hanging out. And she was like, yeah, I think I'd like that. So I said, okay, I got a plan. I didn't have a plan. That was a total lie. I had no plan. But I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we went and drove around and just kind of walked downtown Cincinnati and see the lights and the historical places and just chatted. And halfway through it, she had to go use the restroom. I get out my phone. I texted a friend. I said, hey, I think I'm on a date with someone I shouldn't probably be on a date with, but I'm not sure. I think I'm on a date. She was doing the same thing.
Oh, that's funny.
It was total comical. We were like two teenage kids, definitely later in life, and we've been together ever since, and it's been wonderful. She's an amazing woman. Our friends enjoy us together. When I told my daughter, I was like, hey, you remember Karis? She was like, yeah. I said, so I think we're going to start seeing each other. She goes, Dad, when you just get a good feeling about somebody. I was like, yeah. He goes, I get a good feeling about her. She's
wow.
my new favorite person.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, okay, passed the daughter test.
Yeah.
So that's good. And then I told my ex-wife. My ex-wife and I are still very good friends. And I said, Karis and I think we want to see each other. And she said, really? And then there was a moment I was like, oh, this is not going to go over good. And then it was about just a moment after that, she goes, it totally makes sense. I was like, I have been blessed with my daughter's mother, who's my very good friend, and her boyfriend's amazing. So my daughter has two great people in her life besides her mom and dad, and we all get together. We spent Christmas and Thanksgiving together. We enjoy birthdays together, one another, which is just good friends. We've known each other for a very long time, and it's been such a wonderful experience. And we all have things in our life where life kind of takes its toll. And then every once in a while you meet someone, you realize why it didn't work out with anyone else. And Karis is that person. And for me, I'm just thrilled to be with her. I enjoy her strength of soul in the way that she looks at life. And she's so upbeat and encouraging and me, I tend to be a Debbie Downer. I'm so realistic about everything. Like, oh, that's never going to be successful. And she's like, what are you talking about? This is going to be great. And I enjoy that, and she's good for me, and I believe that I'm good for her. And my daughter loves being around the two of us, and I just have a good time. So right now, life is good when it comes to my lady. I enjoy her. She's beautiful. She is
beautiful. And man,
happens to be very easy on the eyes.
Yeah, it sounds like she's the whole package, and it sounds like you guys definitely complement each other and bring so much to each other's lives. So isn't it cool? It's a beautiful thing to see how life works out, and when you step back from above in the sky and look back on how that whole thing unfolded through the time. I mean, it's just so cool that it was, feels like it was meant to be. So
yeah, it was. And
what a great story.
She gave me this gift in Christmas. It was the the distance between Melbourne, Australia, where we met, and Cincinnati, Ohio. It's like 9,370 some miles. And
Wow.
she's like, it only took 16 years and 9,377 miles to find the person that I wanted to find. And I thought, wow, man, what a way of looking at that. Yeah,
that's
so much life.
there.
And of course, we've been through hard times. So, the passing of Shawn was very difficult. It's my best friend whom really kind of started this whole thing. And I wouldn't change any of it. There were definitely hard times, ups and downs, and it made me and made her who we are. And I continue to look for a brighter future with her. And man, it's been good so far, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon.
That's awesome, brother. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and let us know about your life, man. I feel like I know you a lot better, and I hope everybody listening does too. So really appreciate it, man. You're a class act, and thank you so much. And yeah, keep doing what you do, man.
It's been great. I had a good time, man. It's tough tracking me down, and because I've traveled so much, and I know that's tough. I know you've been trying to pursue me for a while, and I'm glad that I finally got to make this happen. And the book that you just wrote, that was a really good book. We didn't even talk about your book. Yeah. So, just real quick,
sure.
Plug your book, but to plug your book was like, you asked a lot of questions of why do people do jiu-jitsu? And I think you captured that. It was like just in the little vignette stories that you told was like, I knew someone that was somebody of your characters. I knew someone like that. I was like, yeah, man, this is a better way of explaining why people do jiu-jitsu, because it is not easy to tell people that. And I really enjoyed it. I think that was something that the community has needed, especially if you could tell someone like, well, why do you do what you do? You could hand them that book and say, well, here's some stories. Just read this. It'll kind of explain it. And I really enjoyed it. Well done.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it. Now, if we can get everybody that does jiu-jitsu to get a copy to hand to someone else,
yeah,
I'll be good. No, it really means a lot. I really appreciate that. I put my heart and soul into it. I'm not really, a writer per se, but I felt like I could tell that story. So thank you so much for the feedback.
You're welcome.
All right, my friend. Thank you. I wish you a long, healthy, happy life, and let's stay in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Cheers. All right. Really enjoyed that conversation with Jim. What a very interesting person he is, for sure. And by the way, we didn't get a whole lot into his Army career, and that's because Jim was in a special forces unit that was very hush-hush, so we weren't allowed to really get into any of the details about that. But anyway, can't say enough about him and how much I enjoyed hearing his story. He did mention my book, See You on the Mat. It is available on Amazon, and hopefully by the time this episode drops, it should be available on Audible as well. All right, up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment.
It won't be easy. It will be hard because life is hard. That's what life is. These challenges that you face, they're going to do their best to take you down. Do not let them. Confront them, face them, fight them. Do not let them bring you down. Let those challenges raise you up. Let them elevate you. Let the adversity you face today turn you into a better person tomorrow. You have the opportunity to show the world, the whole world, what you are really made of. Sometimes you got a big hill in front of you, big mountain that you got to climb. And you can sit there and you can look at it and you can imagine how hard it's going to be and how much effort it's going to take to get up it. Or you can put one foot in front of the other. I recommend you do that. Doesn't matter how tired you are. Doesn't matter if you can feel your face or not. I don't care how you're feeling. And neither should you. What you should do is not worry about your feelings, but instead get up and go get some. Keep getting after it. Stay strong and fight on.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.graciejujitsurocks.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.